Hello guys, welcome to my channel Book Review 360. In this video, I'll be talking about Niccolo Machiavelli's famous work, The Prince. Uh, Moreover, I'll be talking about the 10 duties which a prince should perform as Niccolo Machiavelli spelled out in his work. So do stay with me till end because before talking about those duties, I will be giving you a background of Niccolo Machiavelli, his career, his political thought. So you will be getting a holistic view about Niccolo Machiavelli and the prince. So the video might be a bit long, but you will get everything you need to know about The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. So let's start off. Niccolo Machiavelli was a late 15th century political advisor and theorist who argued that we shouldn't think that politicians are immoral and simply bad for lying and dissembling and maneuvering. A good politician, in Machiavelli's view, isn't one who is friendly and honest and kind. It is someone who knows how to defend, enrich, and bring honor to the state. Being nice may well be a virtue in general, but what citizens most need from their rulers is effectiveness, which may call upon some darker arts. Once we understand this basic requirement, we stand to be less disappointed and clearer about what we want from our politicians. Niccolo Machiavelli was born in Florence in 1469. His father was a lawyer. Machiavelli received an extensive formal education and got his first job as secretary for the city of Florence. But soon after his appointment, Florence exploded politically and expelled the Medici family who had ruled it for 60 years. As a consequence, Machiavelli received a series of career reversals. The vicissitudes in his career started there and then. Over just a few decades, he went from being an important diplomat to a semi successful general to an enemy of the state, tortured and then exiled when the Medici returned to power. Although Machiavelli was rather a failed politician, he can be remembered as a truly great man because of the two works, The Prince and The Discourses. In them, he addressed a central problem of politics. It is almost impossible to be both a good politician and a good person in a traditional Christian sense. Machiavelli proposed that the overwhelming responsibility of a good prince is to defend the state from external and internal threats, that is, to bring stability in the governance of the state. This means he must know how to fight, but more importantly, he must know about the reputation and the management of those around him. People should neither think he is too soft and therefore easy to disobey, nor should they find him so cruel that he is universally loathed in his society and state. So, he ought to keep a balance between being soft and cruel. Uh, he should seem, more importantly, unapproachably strict, but also reasonable. When Machiavelli turned to the question of whether it is better for a prince to be loved or feared, he wrote that it will be theoretically wonderful for a leader to be both loved and obeyed. A prince should always err on the side of inspiring terror. For this is ultimately what keeps people in check. Machiavelli's Christian contemporaries had suggested that princes should be merciful, peaceful, generous, and tolerant. They thought that being a good politician was, in short, the same as being a good Christian. But Machiavelli argued differently. He asked his readers to dwell on the incompatibility between Christian ethics and good governance. Machiavelli suggested that a leader would do well to make judicious use of what he called virtue. Machiavelli's concept of virtue for politicians involves wisdom, strategy, strength, bravery, and when necessary, ruthlessness. In fact, at one point, Machiavelli uses the deliciously paradoxical phrase criminal virtue to describe the necessary ability of leaders to be cruel in the name of the state and yet still be good as leaders. Machiavelli provided some criteria for what constitutes the right occasion for employing a criminal virtue. These are number one, and any violence must be strictly necessary for the security of the state, and secondly, it must be done swiftly. The world continues to love and hate Machiavelli in equal measure for insisting on focusing our attention on the uncomfortable tension between the two things we love and always want to have together, but perhaps can't. These are effectiveness and kindness. So now let's move on to the 10 duties of a prince which Machiavelli spelled out in his book. Number one, the first and foremost duty of a prince is to maintain stability. uh, this is essentially the most important and driving force for writing the work The Prince, because the chief responsibility is to guarantee stability. And from this responsibility, other duties stem, other nine duties which Machiavelli spelled out in his work stem. Uh, those all nine duties are essentially to maintain stability in the state. Okay, so let's move on to the second duty. The second duty of the prince is to minimize change, because change is negative for stability. The Machiavelli writes that it must be considered that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. So Machiavelli advises for the prince and for the leaders in general that if you want to have longevity in your rule, then you need to keep change to a bare minimum level. Moving on, the third duty or the characteristic of a wise prince is to use virtue as required. Now, Machiavelli writes that the fact is that a man who wants to act virtuously in every way necessarily comes to grief among so many who are not virtuous. Therefore, if a prince wants to maintain his rule, he must learn how to be virtuous and to make use of this or not according to need. Moving on, the fourth characteristic or duty which a prince should perform is to be good or not, depending on the situation. In this to this end, Machiavelli writes, "For there is such a difference between how men live and how they ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns his destruction rather than his preservation, because any man who under all conditions insists on making it his business to be good will surely be destroyed among so many who are not good. Hence a prince, in order to hold his position, must acquire the power to be not good and understand when to use it and when not to use it in accord with necessity." Moving on, the fifth responsibility or duty of a prince is to be liberal or stingy as required for the moment. So the prince has this good prince has this ability to be liberal and offer concessions, but to be stingy when required. Machiavelli writes that a prince should not worry if he's prudent about being called stingy. So a prince shouldn't be, you know, worrying too much about his reputation. He should be deciding on merit whether the situation demands being liberal and generous or to be, cautious and stingy. Let's move on. The sixth duty of a prince is whether he should be loved or feared. I mean, this is a key characteristic and the key dilemma, which we also earlier discussed. Machiavelli writes that it is better to be feared, because we can't have both things in a prince. But a prince, what a prince can do is being feared and avoid being hated. Uh, let's see what Machiavelli writes about being loved or feared dilemma. Machiavelli says it is better to be both loved and feared, but because it is difficult to join them together, it is much safer for a prince to be feared than loved, because men in general are ungrateful, changeable, simulators and dissimulators, runaways in danger, eager for gain. While you do well by them, they are all yours. But Machiavelli writes that proper use of fear is also must. quote unquote. Nevertheless, the wise prince must make himself feared in such a way that if he does not gain love, he escapes hatred. Because to be feared and not to be hated can well be combined. This he will always achieve if he refrains from the property of his citizens and his subjects and from their women. Number 7. Know when to keep a promise. Machiavelli writes, how praiseworthy a prince is who keeps his promises and lives with sincerity and not with trickery, everybody realizes. Nevertheless, experience in our time shows that those princes have done great things who have valued their promises little, and who have understood how to addle the brains of men with trickery. And in the end, they have vanquished those who have stood upon their honesty. So, Machiavelli here proposes that keeping promises strictly is not always good. I mean, you can give a semblance as to the fact that okay, you are good at keeping your promises, but it can be hazardous. So uh, sometimes you need to employ trickery and, of course, not fulfill on your promises, being a good statesman. So, moving on, number 8, appear to have good qualities. Here, once again, Machiavelli writes that for a prince, it is not necessary to have all the good qualities, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. Further, I shall be so bold as to say this, that if he has them and always practices them, they are harmful, and if he appears to have them, they are useful. So, once again, a bit of deception here, uh, preached by Machiavelli. He says that appearances are useful, but you don't have to, act on all the good qualities, even if you have them, because that might lead to your ruin. So let's talk about appearances a bit more. Everyone sees what you seem, but few know what you are. This is what Machiavelli writes in his book. Number 9, hold to right when possible, but do wrong if required. So this essentially means that one should adjust to meet circumstances. Machiavelli writes, a prince must have a mind ready to turn in any direction, as fortune's winds and the variability of affairs require. Yet he holds to what is right when he can, but knows how to do wrong when he must. Lastly, a prince realizes that the end will justify the means. This is the characteristic of a wise prince. In that context, Machiavelli writes that princes must maintain authority. If a prince succeeds in establishing and maintaining his authority, the means will always be judged honorable and be approved by everyone. So, what essentially Machiavelli is saying here is that if a prince is has succeeded in establishing his authority and he is governing his subjects uh, in a very stable manner, then the people will forget about the means, however authoritative they be. So these are the essential lessons which Machiavelli writes in his book about the duties of a prince, about the good qualities of a prince. So, uh, what do you think is the basis of Machiavellian thought? Should reality be accepted over the ideal? Is mankind inherently evil? Is it better to be feared or loved? Was Jesus feared or loved? Does the time frame of government determine morality? Are Machiavellian principles acceptable? So, do write about these in the comments and let me know if you want me to analyze some more aspects of The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. Thank you for watching, and for more videos, subscribe to my channel. Thank you.